Welcome to Pulpit to Pew. I'm Johnny Gwynn.
And I'm Beverly Gibson.
And this is the show where I talked with my pastor of what I heard in the pew.
And I talk about what I was trying to convey.
Hello, Beverly.
Hey, Johnny.
Looking through my notes, it looks like through our All Saints celebration that we had this last week, we're going to talk a lot about kind of the nature of what heaven is. Right. How do we see heaven? How do we secularly see heaven? And then how we biblically see heaven.
What's your vision?
Right. And of course, we have what I think is a top 5 Bible moment coming up somewhere near the end.
Yes, Lazarus, come out.
So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
All dogs go to heaven. You remember that movie from 1989? Both of our children loved it. We had it on VHS originally, and then we migrated to DVD, and now I'm sure it plays on an eternal loop out there in the ether somewhere. If you don't remember it, let me tell you just a little bit about it. It is the story of a canine casino owner, you can't make these things up, named Charlie, who's given voice by Burt Reynolds, who died just this year. And Charlie is killed by a gambler named Carface, who's given voice by Vince Tayback from Mel's Diner. He died in 1990. And Charlie returns to Earth via a watch that can control time. And he comes back in order to set things right and come to the aid of a little orphan girl named Anne Marie. Now, there are some other dogs in this movie who are voiced by some of the actors that we see no longer. You remember Dom DeLuise, who died in 2009. He is Itchy Itchiford. I'm sorry, I just had to say that. And Charles Nelson Riley, if you remember him, who died in 2007. And he is the voice of Killer. Now, I mentioned this movie not just to take a little nostalgia trip down memory lane to a simpler time, but because it contains a really clear picture of our conventional sense of heaven. Right? The dogs float on clouds where they're chewing bones, and they play endless rounds of fetch, and their harps and their halos. And there's a version of St. Peter and the pearly gates. And it is the same picture that we're all familiar with from countless cartoons and jokes. It's even the picture sometimes that we paint for each other when a loved one dies, when we say things like, imagine him or her now with so-and-so and so-and-so enjoying such and such. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is completely normal. It is a comforting imagination for us, and it is in its own way a statement of faith. And it's also understandable, to go back to the movie, that we wish that same kind of happy, continuing life and eternal joy for our companions who loved us so much, even though they are animals. The picture, however, is not strictly biblical, I will say, and it's not entirely theologically sound. Scripture gives us visions more like the ones that we have today.
Wow, all dogs go to heaven. That is, I guess, a deep track.
It is. And, you know, it's one of those things that I found that my children, for whatever reason, hang on to. I mean, even in early adulthood, it's like, all dogs go to heaven. Like, why?
I vaguely remember that. I think, did you say 82, 1982?
89.
89, okay.
And then there was a second one, there was a sequel. But things get worse. There might have even been a third one. I don't know.
So that means they did pretty well with the first one. They had some heavy hitters in there, which I didn't realize, we are celebrating All Saints celebration. So you have Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, Charles Nelson
that was
Riley,
fun. That was
who
fun.
said, by the way, they are, cloud of witnesses.
Great cloud of witnesses.
Great cloud of witnesses. So it's a nice way to put that in there. You mentioned that it's okay to have this cartoon view of heaven. Of course, it's an easy tool for cartoonists and movie people, that. And but is it dangerous to have that view?
Well, if we hold on to it as though that is absolutely the truth.
Yeah.
And we substitute that for any striving to see anything further. And as we'll see as we move through the sermon, when I say not theologically sound, I meant even more than that. I didn't mean just doctrine. I meant in terms of a full and robust and active and mature and responsible faith. That picture doesn't really help us with that.
Okay.
And we'll talk, it'll become apparent why as we get
Those
closer.
Visions more like the ones that we have today. From the prophet Isaiah, who gives us a picture of the day of the Lord when all people will be gathered on God's mountain and they will all sit down together for a great feast that God will provide. And Isaiah tells us when that happens, death will end and tears will cease, and all disgrace that we have known in our earthly existence will be taken away. And here's the central thing about that vision. God comes to God's people who have waited for him and who now can be glad and rejoice in his salvation. The essential direction of movement is that God is coming. God is coming. Heaven is coming here among us. And that's also the vision that is given to St. John the Divine that he recounts for us in the book of Revelation, which we heard this morning. We often read this particular lesson along with the first one at burials of the dead. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, and they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them." Here, people, never mind dogs, don't go to heaven. We don't singly approach the pearly gates and knock for St. Peter. But rather, God comes to us and creates a home among us with humanity and wipes away tears and takes away pain and suffering and death. This is a new creation. It is something made new. Creation is good, and now it is created anew, even better. And that is the theology of the conclusion of the book of Revelation. God says, "See, I am making all things new." This world of violence and hatred and the killing of innocents, the rampages of disease and hunger and homelessness, the prevalence of anger and destruction amongst us is replaced. It is taken away and replaced with something new. John has this glimpse through the veil, this vision of what lies beyond the place where we now dwell, and he offers it to us not as a vision of some never land, not as some kind of nostalgic return to the way things were at some beginning point. And it's not a reward or a kind of gated community for the folks who got it right. Rather, it's a vision offered to us as a way forward. It is a challenge that is given to God's people that we are called to live into, to be shaped by, to have always in front of us, to guide us in our ways of being and living and acting. God calls us out in this way, out of the darkness and death and despair that we know, into the light and life of hope. That is the essential message of our gospel reading today from John.
So we go from never-ending dog treats and endless games of fetch in the clouds to roughly what I kind of imagine is a kind of a stark kind of mountaintop in Isaiah. But the message is God, it's a feast.
Right.
And he is there to wipe the tears from our eyes because he has defeated death. Is that correct?
Right. It's the vision of the day of the Lord, which is the consummation of all things. And in that vision, God comes to be with God's people. Right? God has been promising all along, going back into Genesis and into the book of Exodus, that he would come and make his home with us, and it would be a life of abundance and joy and fullness. And this is the vision of how that happens, and it happens with a great feast. In a way, related as an image to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, if you think about that, or Sermon on the Plain, which is a kind of echo of a gathering of people aspiring toward this, right? That we all sit down together. We've talked about that earlier this year when we talked about the pot liquor papers.
Right.
And we talked about the great feast. And that is the Eucharistic banquet in Christian terms. You just think about it. When we get together and there's a great meal and we're with the people we love. So it's not unrelated to the heavenly vision that we're talking about, because it is happy and a gathering and like a big party. But the difference is it's not on the clouds somewhere.
Right.
It's here.
It's on
earthly.
It's present.
It's an embrace, a deep affirmation of the goodness of creation and God's pleasure in his creation. And we remember that from Genesis. God made all things, and he said, this is good.
Because life isn't supposed to be,
right.
Life is supposed to be enjoyed,
right.
Or rich.
This is good. And God made all of creation for his own delight and to love and be loved by it.
Yeah.
And so the ultimate end is not for us to float in the ether. The ultimate end is for all of this to be made new and made full. And
now, not
right.
At some point later, because you say it's not a reward. It's not like you're, checking off the list and saying I've earned enough points to knock on the door and say I've earned my right.
Right.
Is the message that God is wanting us to have some type of semblance of what heaven, peace is in the moment, in the world that we are in now.
Right, and to be working for that.
Right, working towards it.
When the sermon says this is meant to be a vision that we keep in front of us to, and I hate to speak in these terms, but it's true, to set goals.
Shape us, right.
To shape our ambitions, to inspire us and give us hope, even when things seem desperately broken, to say, God's vision is that this broken world should be mended and recreated and made new, and we can participate in that. We're called to participate in that with God. It's not like we can just run it down the pipes and then say, oh, well, God's going to come and bring it all magically back. We're God's creatures, and we're meant to participate in this creation with God, and we see that in the creation of human beings in that Genesis story.
And so Revelation, it talks about God wipes the tear from that. Well, that's Isaiah, but it talks about this world where God saves us from this world of destruction and illness and violence, but we still live in a world of destruction, illness, and violence.
We do.
Is it the idea of we rise above it? Is it because of hope? Because we have the hope above that is what we're striving for, and that gives us something that maybe others don't have?
That's one way of seeing it. I think the other thing that we're called to do is to see that even this brokenness and this anger is a kind of mask, or it's a veil, we've used that word some, that hides the real beauty of creation. That
we only see the dark and not seeing the beauty?
Right, and that beauty can be made, and we participate in making that beauty. So rather than participating in making brokenness, rather than participating in destruction, we're called to participate in healing and wholeness and making beauty, and the belief that all human beings, and we'll get around a little later to the baptismal covenant, are created by God to enjoy those things. And we can't deprive anyone of that intentionally.
And we use hope for that, in that rebuilding phase. In that brokenness, hope is there because of our belief. I just heard on the Jason Stapleton program, it's a podcast, a good friend of mine. He talks a lot about economics and politics, but he really gets into, he's really making a movement towards kind of like a better you,
Right.
Like to be, invest in yourself, invest in being better. And his tagline is just be better. So that's every day, be better. And he was talking about, even in the worst case scenario, you have to have hope and you have to have a vision of a better world or you won't go forward. And he brought up, there were studies of Holocaust survivors. And it was almost, he said in the research, it was almost blatantly obvious the ones that survived could still see things will be better when this is over.
Right, to have a
vision. That hope.
Right.
And he says, can you imagine what we complain about? And what they saw and the people who still could pass that on to themselves and to others, those are the ones that had the will to keep going forward.
Right, and that is deep in the Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
The admonition to tell your children these things, teach your children these things, and always have that vision in front of us. No matter what we go through here, God's promises endure. And the deep belief in that is powerful. It's potent. I wish I had it in front of me to share, but the dean of the cathedral in Chicago shared a message after the shootings in Pittsburgh that he received from the chief rabbi of Chicago, Rabbi Pupko. And my husband and I heard Rabbi Pupko teach a few years ago. And he wrote, actually, from a trip to the sites of the Holocaust. And he wrote back to his people and to the cathedral there in Chicago to say, this is a part of who we have been and who we are, and yet we are committed as a people to God's implanted vision of hope and healing and those promises of fulfillment. And our job is to work toward that. And so to take a moment of extreme grief and loss and to lift that up and say, and yet the vision is this. And out of this moment, we're called to strive for that vision and to strive with each other and with God. And we'll get to that with each other in a bit in the sermon.
Jesus did not come, as we hear at the beginning, immediately when he heard that Lazarus was gravely ill. Lazarus, his dear, dear friend. Jesus did not come then. He waited. And when Mary came to Jesus and knelt in front of him, that's what she told him when he arrived. She said, Lord, if you had come, my brother would not have died. But Jesus didn't come to prevent his friend's death. He didn't come to keep him or anyone else from dying. He didn't come to keep himself from dying. He came to demonstrate the power of God to create new life out of death. In John's account of this scene, we see Jesus grieving. We see him doing the things that we all do. We see his tears. We feel his disturbed spirit. We walk with him to his friend's grave, and we know the reality of what happens to a body when it dies. Jesus doesn't deny any of this. He doesn't skirt around it. He doesn't try to talk anyone out of the inevitable human love and loss that is part of our lives. But rather, he says to Martha, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And so they roll away the stone from the front of the grave, and Jesus prayed there in front of all of them so that they could hear. So that they could hear and believe that God had sent him. And then in a loud voice he said, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, and Jesus said, unbind him and let him go. New life had been created by God here. Jesus would later be raised from the dead and given new life here. And he did that so that there would be eternally new life among us here. And we live into the fulfillment of that.
So in a previous section, I can't believe I passed over this on our last little conversation, was God comes to us, we don't go to God.
Right.
So that is really a alliteration, is that the right word? Alliteration of Jesus going to Lazarus, right? God coming to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And to make life out of death, boy, that really flows in pretty good with the first two readings.
Yes, it does.
The Lazarus story does.
Well, and the same thing is true, of course, of of Jesus' own resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't actually resurrect himself, right? He is resurrected by God. He is brought to the Father, or brought back to life here, right? And that's an important distinction, and I don't get into that in the sermon. He is a resurrected body. He's not exactly as he was before he died, and he's not exactly a ghost. And he'll transform once again when he ascends, right? So there's that kind of in-between time. What is it? Well, that's a great question.
More than you can ever imagine.
Right. And that's the mystery, I think, a beautiful mystery of the resurrection and of this creation of new life and of making all things new. So when people would ask, I think quite naturally, okay, so this is a new creation and a new heaven and a new earth, and the dead are raised, so what does that look like? Well, I don't know. I mean, we have these visions, but no one's seen it. It hasn't happened yet. But we do get glimpses of that in things that happen to us in life. New life can come.
Oh, from the mustard seed. We talk about that.
Yeah.
The mustard seed has to die and put it in the ground, die, and then new life comes from the mustard seed.
Right. And it's part of, we talk about Joseph Campbell all the time. It's part of the cycle of the human life itself. And there is potentially always resurrection in our existence.
Yeah.
We think that something in our lives is dead, but it's not.
Again, coming from my Catholic background, I'd probably be chastised for bringing this up, but the death card in the tarot card is not always death.
Okay.
It's a change.
Interesting.
Because, so I was like, oh gosh, who would want to get the hangman, the death card, and the so-and-so if you were into that, even if you're doing it for a lark. But when they explain it, it's like, whoa, the death card means something will have to change. There is an evolution, meaning how you know the world today might not be how you know it tomorrow. And we don't know if it's good or bad. And that kind of is an interesting way of looking at death not being so black and white with human death. It's like, wait a minute, is it a door?
Right.
Is it something new? Is it a nothingness? But the idea is it's something that is different.
It's different, and therefore it's something we fear.
Yeah.
And once again, there is that connection with death as something to be feared and something to be avoided.
Well, that's why the Grim Reaper looked pretty darn scary.
Yeah, everybody wants to get away from that. Baptism itself, right? If you go back to the language of baptism, is a dying. We say that in baptism we die with Christ and are raised to a new life with Him. So when you're baptized, there is a new you.
That's kind of like an oxymoron a little bit, because it seems like a beginning, but it's actually a birth, but a death, and how it works together. Right. Because you're starting something anew when you think you're renewed, right? You're baptized, you're reborn, but it involves something with dying with Christ. So it's all wrapped together in that burrito.
That's good.
It's all good.
Well, and that actually is a pretty good segue to the point I was going to make. And that is, we baptize babies in our tradition, right? And you grew up with that convention as well, and the little burrito baby.
Right, because you wrap them up, right?
Right. And so we lose a little bit of that sense that was very prevalent in the early church and is also visibly apparent in traditions that practice adult baptism, and immersion, that there's a sense that the old you dies, right? And if you get immersed, right, then and it's kind of scary, I will say. I was baptized that way.
The dunking?
Yeah,
the full dunking.
They put you, the handkerchief over your face, and you're all the way down in the water, and you're not in control, and then you're pulled back up, and that is, buried with Christ in baptism, risen to walk in newness of life. And so that really captures the whole sense of what we're talking about, and its scariness too, and messy.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah.
You need lots of towels for everybody too, because I love those. And always in movies, there's always one of those scenes, especially in a period piece, where it's they're going through the woods, and you always walk up, and there is like these hundreds of people in white robes standing in the river.
Right.
It's like they always, and usually that's a change in the movie. There's usually some transformation in that movie where someone says, "I no longer want to be a robber anymore," or something like that.
What was that movie with Robert Duvall, The Apostle?
The Apostle.
Yeah. That's a great illustration.
And there's a really funny one with "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" One of the guy really does get saved, and he thinks it just. hey, everything I did, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm washed anew. And he keeps bringing that up all the time. Well, I don't have to go back to jail anymore because I've been washed anew.
Get out of jail free card.
I will go back to the Lazarus moment has got to be a top 5 biblical moment.
Yeah,
got to be.
It's big.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Well, and it's huge.
And it's
in
kind
the
of
whole
scary
story.
and creepy.
It
really
scary
is.
and creepy.
I mean, even the way they explain it, come out and he's bound up, and you think, well, it's the traditional mummy.
Yeah, that's what he looks like.
Bound top to bottom with strips of cloth.
And kind of the zombie sort of thing is there too. It's all kind of part of that. And Mary does say, or is it Martha, when they get up to the tomb, she says, already the stench has begun.
Which
because
is a lot of,
he's been dead 4 days.
That's a lot of reality right there.
Yeah. So there's no skirting around the grittiness of this. We were talking just a little bit before we began about this time of year and the season and the holiday, and this might be a good place to talk a little bit about that. All Saints Sunday, and I'll get to this maybe in the next part of this sermon, is a transfer from the first day of November.
Right, because it wasn't a Sunday.
Right.
November 1st fell on a Wednesday. Okay.
And it's not like Christmas, which you can't transfer, or Easter, which is always going to be on a Sunday. But it's so important that the church allows its transfer to Sunday. You don't have to do it, but it can be done, and many, many churches do. All Saints is part of what could be called a kind of triduum of the autumn, with All Hallows Eve being what we call Halloween, right, which is where that word comes from, on the 31st. And then on November 1st is All Saints' Day. And then on November 2nd, there is All Souls' Day, which is the day of all the faithful departed. And that kind of happened because All Saints' Day was at the beginning, and you're familiar with this from growing up. It was just for the people who were truly, technically saints, right, for the martyrs.
Right.
Over time, that's changed a little bit, but the faithful departed in the Southern Hemisphere, that's celebrated as the Day of the Dead, right? Is a day for remembering everybody, all the ancestors, all of those folks who've gone on ahead of us. All Saints' Day had been reserved for the true examples of the faith, although now we have recaptured an earlier tradition in the church which sees all Christians as saints. We're all trying
that's the cloud of witnesses, right? Yeah, okay.
But the interesting thing about this period of time, and it's funny that, I don't know if funny is the right word, that this ends up in the gospel, is that if you look at the Celtic traditions and northern peoples who really did, in an often pagan way, celebrate this as Samhain, and it gets incorporated into the church, it was understood then, and I think we still understand it this way, as a time when the veil is thinner between this world and the other world, between those who have gone on and those who remain. And that continues to be a part of who we are, and we explore that in lots of different ways. And it's tough for us with our rational, late modern minds to get our hands and minds around that. And the way we do that most often, you and I have talked about this before, is with stories and with movies. And
Southerners get it because we have so many superstitions and so many things that we carry on with the idea of the lovingly departed are always with us. Yeah. Not just so much on one day of the year. It's just like literally they're always around us.
Right. And one of the things that was often done on All Souls Day, families would gather and they would have a big meal or feast, and they would leave a vacant seat for the ones who had gone on.
It's like Passover for the Jews, right? For Elijah.
Right. Elijah's seat, which is kind of a cool thing. Yeah. The idea that they are always present with us, and we celebrate that and embrace that at this particular time. So there's a kind of there's a grittiness and a grimness and a darkness to it, but at the same time, there's a sense of love and faith and connectedness. And when we talk about the saints, and in the proper preface for this day, at the Eucharist says this too, it unites the living and the dead. It's the day when we have that sense that we're all one. And
I didn't have that a lot in my notes today, but the word united, and I think that's actually coming up in the next section, is about how this time is we're not separated, but we are actually united with our loved ones who have passed. I guess what we're saying is their memory and the things we honor them actually unites us that are in the present.
Right.
Okay.
Here's another essential thing about this incident and about the visions of Isaiah and John. The community is gathered. It's not single people. It's not people in isolation. It's people together. Isaiah's vision is a vision of all peoples gathered for God's feast. John's vision is a city, not individual petitioners who stand at the gates, not people who work out their own salvation alone. And this reminds us that the new creation, that the new heaven and the new earth is essentially about communion. Community and communion are not gatherings of affinity groups, of like-minded people, but are rather about gathering people invested in knowing and following and sharing in the body of one person, Jesus Christ. The Feast of All Saints, which is observed on November the 1st, which was Thursday, is so important. It is so central to the life of the church that it can be, and it is widely transferred to the next Sunday, to this day, so that the whole body has the opportunity to gather, to be at the font and at the altar, and to know that we are united not only as the living, but also united with the dead, because we need to feel ourselves gathered with the great cloud of witnesses, with all the Christians who have come before us through baptism and through the journey of life and been nourished at the Lord's table. We need to do that together. We cannot move toward the new Jerusalem, the new heaven, and the new earth by ourselves. We can't do that alone. We need our people. We always need our people. We need our community. We need all of them. And we need that in order to challenge us. And we also need it so that we can care for each other and look after each other and hold each other up when we become weak. When my prayer grows weak, then I rely on the prayers of the saints to pray for me. We all do. When the living water inside each of us begins to go dry, we rely on the streams of living water that flow from God through all the others around us. That is how the water is replenished. We do not, each of us, need to think that we have to do that on our own, that we must do everything for ourselves. We do all that is needed together, with each other, and for each other, and with the help of God. The saints that we remember today did that work in their own time, in their own places, and now in the light in which they dwell until Christ's coming again, they support us and they strengthen us in our efforts, in our living. They held up their promises in their time, and today we will renew our own baptismal promises, our vows to do the same thing in our own time. The water of baptism renews the living water in us whenever we call it to mind, and we are fed and we are strengthened in the meal that we share together. All of this is to live and to work together with and in Christ for His making of all things new. Amen.
So, our celebration of those from the past and our remembrance strengthens us as a community when we all realize, and differences of opinion, we said not niches, not subcategories, because we have all that. I mean, we do that with. I mean, let's just take football teams.
Oh yeah, let's do.
But we're in this. We're in that moment of thinking about the new city, this new creation, and then our observance of the saints, and we are all unified under Jesus Christ, and that makes us a community. And if we could hold on to that, then that unity makes us stronger, and we can support each other no matter what our differences are.
Right, and that sense that the prayers of the living and the dead everywhere support us in the present moment, sort of lift us to God. And that is...
As examples, or just a reminder, how? How does that do that?
Well, to follow the somewhat mystical vein that we've been in today, it does it in a mysterious way. Think about this. Monastics or cloistered religious understand the power of prayer very much as something that is their work, that they are there to keep the drumbeat of prayer going.
Mm-hmm.
And they pray because you and I don't have that as our daily job.
They're taking up our slack.
They're doing more than their part because all of us can't always do our part.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what I was getting at in the sermon when I said, when my own prayers become dry, when my own prayers falter, I know that somewhere, someone is offering up prayers that can, as you say, take up the slack.
Well, it makes you not feel alone.
It makes you not feel alone, and it continues the connection. So, and many, many times people will say, I don't have a sense of the presence of God. I don't feel God. And I believe them. I know.
Yeah.
And we all have periods when our doubt is strong and when we feel separated. But in the midst of that, to know that somewhere, someone is holding that connection, is holding the rope, if you will, so that we don't just fall into the abyss. It's being held somehow, somewhere. And that's the part of the great cloud of witnesses that we're trying to get at, both the living and the dead. Protestants have a hard time, with why do we pray for the dead, and what exactly are the dead doing, and why do we pray for them to go from strength to strength, and I don't really get that. But it is a mystery, and we do believe that all things that have been created, all beings that have been created, continue in God, and their prayers continue, and their goodness continues, and that is something that we can draw from in a way that we don't completely understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, the Catholic Church that I understand, we had an intercession of the saints, which is why we have so many statues.
Right, yeah.
And people think we're worship. Now, I can't tell you how many times I have questions with people saying, y'all worship all these weird saints and stuff. I said, whoa, wait a minute. That's not worship. The way that I understand it is we are asking Saint, Columba to intercede for us to pray for these things that we are saying, or I guess, direct line to the big guy,
right.
But it's interesting. It's the idea of like making, and a lot of times it's very strange. Like when they take the saints, almost like it reminds me of like having baseball cards for saints. Like, there's a saint of selling houses. And
well, it kind of is like that.
It really is.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that when you have a problem, you go to that saint of lost cause or whatever, and I almost like it focuses your prayer.
Well, it does.
It gives you a parameter,
and it's kind of like help me.
Yeah,
and we do that in real life. Like if there's something that I know you're good at, and I know I've got to deal with it, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, Johnny, can you help me out with this?
Yeah.
Because I can't do this by myself. And the saints do the same thing.
Yeah,
except exponentially cooler
or
more
even,
powerful.
It's almost like a role model or an example. Like, hey, if I understand the life of a saint, it might inspire me to be a certain way, because I can get obsessive about someone from history, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm obsessed with like St. Ignatius' transformation from who he was as a soldier to became the warrior monk for Jesus. There's something interesting in that person that makes that decision at his darkest hour, and makes a decision to say, I can no longer be a warrior, but I will no longer hurt someone. And what I'll do is I'll start bringing people to Jesus instead of doing the exact opposite. And that can happen somewhere in my life. I mean, I might not get hit in the leg with a cannonball, but the idea is something might happen to me where I can't do something. And the idea is I take what I know and do it for something positive that has a bigger meaning and a much more positive outcome.
Well, and it can be affirming. For instance, this morning, just sort of serendipitously, when I was reading the Daily Office, and today in the Anglican Church, we remember William Temple, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, actually during most of the Second World War, during the 30s, I believe, and maybe he died in 1944. And he was a really interesting figure. And I've never really read a whole lot about him. I knew just a little bit about him. But in the account that I was reading about him this morning, he was the president of the Oxford Union, the debating society, and his great gift was to be able to listen to both sides and then get up and summarize the points of both sides so clearly and fairly and compellingly people who had argued on different sides would say, "Oh, well," and they might kind of shift over. But that was his great gift, and he brought that to the church. We take that for granted.
Yeah.
That we don't think that's particularly valuable in the present world, and it might be way more valuable than we think. It might help us out big time, especially with where we are right now.
Especially with unity.
Right. But the other thing that I was fascinated to read was that he believed that writers who were writing not specifically theologically dealt with theological matters better than writers who were.
They had an open mind. They saw both sides of the secular and sacred. It was
really, they were presenting the totality of our struggle. So that he loved the brothers Karamazov, loved Shakespeare, loved Shelley. That helped me. Because, and you and I have talked about this before, I sometimes feel like I'm struggling to pull things in that maybe aren't related, but they're deeply, deeply related. And that helped me. I thought, well, thank you, William Temple, for being one of the saints of the church. And when we remember his gifts, then that should empower us to lift those gifts up and claim them now.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the same way you're talking about with St. Ignatius.
Well, when you get stuck on a sermon, you can pray to, this, what was his name?
Oh, William Temple, help me.
Yeah, help me. Give me some inspiration to draw something in, to teach something out.
Yeah. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. This is so funny we've had this conversation today because I kind of thought the idea was, what does heaven look like? We've been talking about that. Like, what is heaven? Again, I think it becomes very mystical. Is heaven here and then heaven somewhere else? And that's just the way it is? Or we strive to be as close as we can to heaven on earth? Because in the Lord's Prayer it says, "As it is in heaven,
on earth as it is
on earth as in heaven." Is that the goal, the vision that we are working towards, to do our best to shape ourselves to heaven on earth as it is in heaven? We're
meant to strive for it now.
Yeah.
At the same time, what the Scripture says is that there will be a new creation.
Yeah.
It will be new. It will not be exactly the same as this one. It will be renewed. And what that will look like, we don't know. What is that other world, right? And we've talked about that some, what's on the other side of the veil. And I've talked about these as being a vision of what's on the other side of the veil. How does that work? Where is it? I couldn't say.
Well, we know it's not going to be Burt Reynolds as a dog on a cloud, probably.
I hope not.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to be so disappointed.
Wait a minute. We might have gone to the other place.
Oh, no.
Well, and so, which gets me back to, again, this one of those things that scars you when you're little, watching The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
So there was an episode, and it's called A Nice Place to Visit, is the name of it. And roughly it was a guy named Rocky Valentine.
Okay.
He was a low-level crook. And he gets shot by the cops, knocking off a pawn shop or something, right? Well, Pip shows up, and Pip is what feels like a guardian angel. And so he escorts him to this wonderful place that he goes to, nice place to visit. So Rocky, everything he does, he wins at every hand in the casino. Okay. He gets every girl that he wants, everything that he thinks he needs to do. It just is working, and nothing ever fails. It's all successful. And then he goes to rob a bank, and it's all too perfect. And then he realizes that something's not right, and then he, talks to Pip, and then he's like, "Hey man, I really need something not to go right for me, because, I'm really not enjoying this anymore." And he goes, "This is not what I thought heaven would be at all." And Pip goes, "Wait a minute, you think this is heaven?
Uh-oh.
This is the other place." Oh, no. And that's when it ends. And that show stuck. That's a 50s TV show.
Yeah.
That hit me was, oh my gosh, what you think might be heaven might create its own sense of dread. And because him winning everything, again, just that whole thing of like everything he thought he wanted, that would be nonstop winning, never being in trouble, never getting caught by the cops. Actually, he's in the bad place. He's not in the good place.
Oh, wow. And well, that's such a thread and such a deep kind of seam through so many stories. As you were saying that, it reminded me of It's a Wonderful Life, which is the same premise. Obviously, A Christmas story, and not a Christmas story.
I was going to say, wait, shoot his eye out, right?
No, oops, not that one. The Charles Dickens one.
Right.
That is kind of part of that too, where you're given a vision of how life might be without you, right? If you go back to It's a Wonderful Life, or how things could unfold differently. And that's a kind of angelic, always an angelic presence is the one who leads you through that. And as you see in Dickens, then that can be a benevolent figure or a rather dark one.
Or the Grim Reaper shows up.
Yeah. So, and those things are always meant to give us a fuller and firmer sense of ourselves and of our calling and what it is that we're really to understand has value around us. So yeah, it's always the things that I think are important. It's what does Princess Leia say to Han Solo? If it's money that you want, then money is what you will get, right? And it turns out, of course, money is not what he wants. And that would have been so much less than what it is that he actually has. And that's kind of the message in all of that is there's something beyond what you think you want, you don't know it.
I'm watching this. I finished it. It's not very good, but I'm a sucker for Templar Knights. It's called Knighthood. Nightfall, Nightfall. And it's about the quest for the Grail. And roughly, the quest for the Grail just brings hell to everybody.
Yeah.
It literally, the life of this story is wow. Everyone's quest for this symbol, has literally destroyed everything along the way. I'm talking about from the Pope to the King of France to the Queen of Navarre. I mean, it is really nuts. And then the Knight Templar that the story is about realizes, my gosh, I have literally thrown away everyone who's ever loved me for this cup.
Wow.
And that's that thing of be careful what you search for because it might overtake you. Then you start searching. You don't know what you're searching for anymore.
Right. And we won't go to Indiana Jones.
Of course. And by the way, they took a big part out of that. I mean, that's really how the whole thing started because the cup is a very simple, it's the cup of a carpenter. But it's called Nightfall. Biblically and historically, I can't imagine a lot of it's a whole lot of truth to it. But it's a good night soap opera. It kind of reminds me of the 300 a little bit too. That movie 300.
Okay.
It kind of has that feeling too.
Well, and maybe back to William Temple.
Right.
It's a way to explore those ideas and those concepts, and it appeals to something deep inside us, and it probably doesn't hold up if we really pick it apart.
Right.
But to take it as something that we take in and then live with, well, yeah, it's doing something.
Boy, it makes the Pope look bad. Ooh, in this one. But the Templar Knights, they really, in the service of God, I will go ahead, if that order... Boy, they're in the service of God to the point of that warrior monk. Boy, are they to the point of if that's their codes, that is a hard life to live up to. More so than the priest ever were.
Right. Well, and yet another view of some of the brokenness of the church, right, and of our susceptibility to take on the culture.
When they even talk about that, the Templar Knights did not start to be a warring tribe in the Holy Lands against Crusaders to bring a unified Christendom. It started with 9 knights that wanted to protect pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem.
Right, it was the Hospitallers, right?
And they bring it up all the time. So, like one of the guys who kind of goes against the church a lot, his name is Tancred, he has to remind Landry, the temple master, we were not meant to war. We were meant to protect the pilgrims on the way to Jerusalem. When did we lose our way? Right. And that is one of those things to really think about.
Yeah,
you know?
It is. It is.
Okay, well, it's called Nightfall. So we got Twilight Zone in there. We got Netflix shows and All Dogs Go to Heaven and Isaiah and Revelation.
Wow, it's all there. I know what I was trying to think. All Dogs Go to Heaven, the first one is Don Bluth, who is the same animation guy who did The Secret of Nim.
Oh, those are great.
And some others. Those are really great period animated movies, I think.
So was All Dogs Go to Heaven, is that Disney?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I saw Burt Reynolds in it. No Disney.
Yeah.
No.
It was, and I should know. I should have looked that up, but I didn't.
Yeah, you know. I remember the name. I don't remember seeing it, but I do love when you open up and start your sermon with something that I'm like, what is she bringing out now? Wow,
here we go.
A good one.
All Dogs Go to Heaven.
It's a deep. That's one from the deep vault.
It is.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening. This has been a wonderful episode of what heaven is or can be or what it may be, and then some non-biblical views and some very theological views. So we hope
Something for everyone.
Something for everyone, and we hope you enjoyed it. And I am Johnny Gwynn.
And I'm Beverly Gibson.
And Beverly, in your final word.
Amen.
If you'd like to know more about Beverly Gibson and Christ Church Cathedral, please visit ChristChurchCathedralMobile.org. There you'll find information on the church, Reverend Beverly Gibson's recorded sermons, and sermon notes. If you want to know more about Johnny and his Sabbadoodles, visit pulpit2pew.com. I would also like to thank Deep Fried Studios and producer Stacey Wellborn. Without her, this show would not get made. If you have any comments, likes, dislikes, please send information to Stacey at deepfriedstudios.com. Everyone have a great day, and thanks for listening.